Welcome back to the channel. We're back on our Spider-Man Commander deck profile. Today with Spider-Man India. For 3, a green, and a white, you get a 4/4, where whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains flying till end of turn. But you don't necessarily have to pay that mana. You can instead play Web Sling, 1 green and a white, cast a spell for that cost, and return tap creature to your hand. Have it enter the battlefield that way instead. He does have that ability of whenever you cast a creature spell, so he won't see himself be cast, so you don't get the ability off of when he's cast, but we have plenty of low to the ground creatures that we're going to be casting in order to make sure we get plenty of +1/+1 counters onto all of our stuff. You don't necessarily have to put them all onto the same creature or onto himself in order to make sure you can swing in. We want to put them onto a variety of different creatures so that we could get some benefits we'll be seeing later in the video. A lot of creatures in here that just benefit off the +1/+1 counters, ways to give our creatures more +1/+1 counters. We don't necessarily care about cards that double up the number of +1/+1 counters since we just do one at a time, but that's just a general overview of the deck. Let's get into it card by card. Starting us off, we have Lightning Greaves. We want to make sure creatures can attack the turn they come down or tap the turn they come down in order to make sure we could use them for Spider-Man's ability in order to, get them tapped, get that mana, get Spider-Man on the board. Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, in order to get an additional +1/+1 counter on our creatures anytime we put a +1/+1 counter on them, aka getting 2 on them anytime anytime a creature enters the battlefield. Soul Ring for that additional mana while we're here. Swiftfoot Boots, another way to do the same thing as Lightning Greaves, making so that our mana dorks can tap the turn they come down. Well, except unless it's turn 1, because you're not going to have Swiftfoot Boots turn 1. Unless you have Soul Ring. You get it earlier. Haha. Ozolith, in order to make sure that when our creatures do get removed, we don't lose their counters, and we can put them onto the Ozolith and then later move them onto one of our creatures. For our creatures, we have Abzan Falconer. Like I said, we're trying to move our +1/+1 counters onto all of our creatures. Spider-Man India only gives our creatures flying until end of turn, so let's make it so they keep that flying so we keep on swinging in, keep on guarding ourselves. Armorcraft Judge, in order to draw some cards based on all your creatures with +1/+1 counters on them. We're diversifying the number of creatures that we have those +1/+1 counters on, so that allows us a lot of draw power. Arwen, Weaver of Hope. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to put them all onto different creatures. If you put all of your counters onto Arwen, that'll allow you a way to just get those counters onto those other creatures once they're cast anyway, or just whenever they enter. Beast Whisperer for that additional draw power in order to make sure that we're getting our creatures and more creatures cast. Champion Lambholt, another creature we don't mind putting some +1/+1 counters on, allowing ourselves to be unblockable. And just swing on our opponent for a game for the most part. Cosmoguard Zenith, another way to make it so we get plenty of +1/+1 counters onto all of our creatures, because we're going to be able to cast more than one spell each turn. Normally more than one creature spell each turn, thanks to for Spider-Man's ability. But overall, super helpful ability. The tokens entering we could do and gives us more creatures to put +1/+1 counters on, but that doesn't necessarily progress our gameplay that much forward. Defiler of Vigor, pay 2 life rather than green mana for at least 1 green. No, which is the amount of green mana you pay. Whenever you have that, I don't know why I'm struggling with this card. I play this card all the time. Whenever you cast a green permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Once again, putting +1/+1 counters onto all of our creatures. This way, everything gets us +1/+1 counters, gives us all the benefits we like to see. Dust Legion Duelist, whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this card, draw a card. We have some ways to cast creatures during our opponent's turns as well, so we could potentially get those +1/+1 counters during every turn. Even if we just get it once around the table, that's still a pretty positive thing to do. Dust Shell Crawler, giving our creatures trample. This way, while they're not flying, while they're not unblockable, we could still deal some damage. Diadrine Synthesis Amalgam, probably my favorite Edge of Eternity's commander. Enters with number of +1/+1 counters equal to the mana value spent to cast this card. Doesn't care about cost reduction because, that puts it less counters on it. And doesn't care about commander text, but doesn't matter because it's not the commander. But still, getting to remove those 2 +1/+1 counters, getting you a robot, aka something else to put some counters on, and that little bit of draw power, super helpful for this deck. Elvish Mystic for your mana dork in order to make sure we have tapped creatures to return with Spider-Man India's ability. Esper Sentinel, another creature we like to put +1/+1 counters on. Their opponent's not going to pay 2 to stop us from drawing a card. They barely paid a 1. Evolution Witness, another creature we like to put some +1/+1 counters on. This way, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on this card, return target permanent from your graveyard to your hand. Findle Hornells for another mana dork. Good Fortune Unicorn. Some additional +1/+1 counters onto our creatures when they enter. We like to see it. We like +1/+1 counters on everyone. Gyre Sage. Another creature we like to put those +1/+1 counters on in order to get a lot of additional mana, especially if we to give it haste. Hamza, Guardian of Arsham. We like to diversify where we're putting those +1/+1 counters. So this allows us to get a lot of cost reduction for our stuff. Incubation Druid, we're going to have at least one +1/+1 counter on this card. So adding 3 mana for 2 mana, that's worth it. Kamiya the Whispered Hopes in order to get 2 +1/+1 counters anytime we get a +1/+1 counter. And also another card we like to put those counters onto so that we get that additional mana. Kodama of the West Tree, another way to give our creatures trample, also searches us out a whole bunch of lands. Kootsil, Malamet Exemplar. Your opponent can't cast spells during your turn, allowing them to not be able to counter all of our creature spells. Whenever one or more creatures you control with greater power than space power deals combat damage to a player, aka if it flies over, if it tramples over, draw a card. All the creatures with +1/+1 counters are drawing us cards. Llanowar Elves for another mana dork, Mana Gorger Hydra. Another creature with a lot of +1/+1 counters on it. Metastatic Evangel. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, we get the Spider-Man India ability when a card is cast, and then this is whenever a creature enters, so we get 2 +1/+1 counters if we don't have more than, that. Mikaeus Lunarch, another way to have a good creature with a lot of +1/+1 counters, to put those +1/+1 counters everywhere. Or Boroid, talk about having +1/+1 counters everywhere. We get those +1/+1 counters onto itself, and then onto all of the other creatures we control, equal to its power. So it starts off at 1, 2, but if we have Spider-Man India on the board, that's a lot of +1/+1 counters onto it. Pride Mountain, another trample enabler for our +1/+1 counters. Renata, Call to Hunt. We want to make sure all of our creatures have those +1/+1 counters. This helps us do just that. Rishkar, Pima Renegade. We want to make sure all of our creatures can tap for mana. This way you really keep going with our plays. And especially if we just get them haste. Toski, Bearer of Secrets. Just an overall good creature. Good for that draw power, especially with us trampling over. Tuskguard Captain, another trample enabler in order to make sure that we can deal that damage. And Warden of the Grove, really good card. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Whenever another non-token creature enters, it endures X, where X is number of counters on this card. So if you just put all your counters on this, everything's entering with all those counters. Let's scroll on over to the second half of the deck. Speaking of things entering with a lot of +1/+1 counters, we have Kadara's Crusade. Get your dice out. Feldar Retreat. In order to get some additional creature tokens, but really the Vigilance is helpful for us here with this one, allowing us that way to swing in without being guards down. Hardened Scales, whenever we get a counter, we get an additional counter. Innkeeper's Talent, when we get a +1/+1 counter onto all of our creatures, and that Ward 1 is just super helpful for this deck as well. Cigar to Summon, really helpful in terms of having a +1/+1 counter on all of our creatures. This way, they could all just swing in and win the game. Smothering Tide, I mean, you're in a mono white. You're in a white deck. You could run Smothering Tide. This way, you get that additional mana. And Tribute to the World Tree. Have our stuff enter with some +1/+1 counters and a little bit of draw power while we're at it. For our instance, we have a Chroma's Will for making sure we could win the game, essentially. That's basically what the card says. Everything, swing away everything and win the game. Beast Within for some some removal. Biosynthetic Burst, some +1/+1 counters, trample, indestructible, a lot of protection. Another way to untap our stuff as well. Plus maneuver for some protection. Gaia's Gift for some protection. Generous Gift for some removal. Heroic Intervention for some protection. Inspiring Call allows us to get a whole bunch of protection along with a lot of draw power off of it as well. Putting those +1/+1 counters on all of our creatures, helpful for this deck. Pet Exile for some removal. Snakeskin Veils for some protection. Source of Plowshare removal. Teferi's Protection. Unbreakable Formation protection. We don't really have any special lands in this one. For our sorcerers, Austere Command for a board wipe, Damning Verdict for a board wipe, Farseek, Nature's Law, Three Visits for our ramp, and Rishkar's Expertise for a lot of draw power. But yeah, that's the deck there. Probably could use a little bit more draw power, I'd say. But if there's anything we're missing in the deck or anything you'd like to add, leave it down there in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching, though, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.